Hello everyone, my name is Steve Araba, and yes, my wife made me do this because I'm camera shy. Over the past years, if you know the story, between the time God told me my wife would be my wife and when we actually got married was within a space of 24 years, actually a little bit more than 24 years. And I got to know about it when I was 17. And so if you do the math, you see that I was growing an afro when I started, but by the time I would get married, I'd lost some hair. So there have been many questions that people had asked me over time. And especially, ever since I got married, a lot more people have asked me questions like, did you not run mad? Did you not go crazy? What were you doing while you were waiting? So this video is in an attempt to answer some of the questions. I know it won't be exhaustive, but to pick the most recurring questions. And that's what I'm doing. So the first one is, okay, how did I hear God? I remember for 2 years before the time I actually heard God about who my wife would be, I had actually started praying that God would show me who my wife was. I don't know what I was thinking. I was about 15 years old. I just graduated from high school. Well, secondary school as we would have it in Nigeria. Okay. I was 15 years old, just graduated from high school, and for some reason I got the wild idea to start praying about wife, while my age mates were looking for the next Nintendo games or, just whatever kids did. I was praying about wife. And I remember that was my prayer every single morning. It seemed like it was the most important thing. At the time, my siblings were already meeting their spouses, chasing after some, so it seemed like the next thing to do because they were my models. So I started praying about that. And when I eventually heard God, it was in church. We had just finished church service. I was talking with my siblings and friends, around the fence within church, and then I heard a voice right in my head that said, "Look back, that is your wife." And I turned back and saw my wife. Of course, we were all still young then. I was like, okay, this doesn't make sense, because there were so many things that were different, that created a barrier. One, I wasn't even close to the family. Two, the circumstances of my family at the time, we were living without my parents, and things were just really awkward. And then I think I'd graduated from high school, but I didn't quite pass. So things were not looking good. And I was also still young myself. Anyway, I heard the voice and I was like, okay, this is weird. But what I did was, rather than, start talking to anyone, I didn't tell anyone about it. I just went back to pray again. Initially I did bind the devil. I thought, okay, you know, that girl couldn't be my wife. I thought maybe it would be another teenager or something. And so I went back to pray and I spent time praying. But of course, as time went on, some of the things that I tried to do was, okay, because I had other dreams and, everything seemed like a confirmation to what I had heard in actual voice. So what I did was I just started asking God, okay, God, if this is actually your plan, I'll need some kind of confirmation. And I started putting down confirmations to say, okay, if this happens, but I didn't just pick one, I picked a series of things, and some of them were going to be in the future, actually. Things that she was going to be interested in, things that where she was going to live, things about her family, things about her sibling, things about her, extended family, just different things that I could think in my young mind. And the funny thing is, every single one over the years, it wasn't just at an instant, every single thing God answered to point me to say this. And that was that. Another one that's been coming up is, how did I cope with the emotions of waiting for God's plan to unfold? And of course, there are different emotions that happen with this one. But the easy answer is I ran mad. I was I don't think it's something that I want anybody to go through. But if that is God's dealing with you, you might as well just get used to it, because it won't end until the time. And so you have to come to a point where you understand that, okay, God has the best in plan for me, and I just have to go with it regardless of how I feel about it now. So how did I cope with the emotions? Of course, I talked with people. I shared the experience with people. Some of the trusted senior friends that I had, I spoke about it with them to say, okay, well, this is what has happened over the years, and this is where I am. And oftentimes, they always went on ahead to say, if it's God's will, He will make it come to pass. So I sought for encouragement from close friends that I believed were spiritually intelligent along those lines. But most of the times, I was alone by myself. And I just had to keep thinking, God, what am I supposed to do now? You know, I've tried to be this lady's friend. She said no at different points. At some point, I was in the friend zone. And, for a lot of guys, you never get out of the friend zone. A lot of times I was angry. I was angry with God, not even with her. Well, until later. But I was angry with God to say, well, if you said something, you know, there are scriptures that say you turn the hearts of kings and princes and whatsoever you want. But this is just one girl. You can't deal with one girl. So there were many emotions, but most of the time when I was angry, I was talking with God, I think, essentially. And in many of the times, I think I felt very much like Job. Like, I believe I was doing everything right. Why is all of this happening? You know, but I made sure I kept talking to God, and that was all I was doing. So another question that's come up many times is, okay, so what did you do during the waiting period? Now, for me, there's always been something about the way my life has been. If I'm trying to attain a goal and it's not quite working the way that I want it to, one of the things that I do is I do the next best thing. And so through those years, I was like, well, I mean, even though she's not agreeing to be my friend, or she's not agreeing to be my wife, when the time came when I thought I was old enough to get engaged or at least start a courtship with her, but we had been friends all through the years. I just thought, well, if you're going to marry, you need to have a job, you need to build capacity. So I was going to school, getting my master's degree, working on my PhD. I was working on getting jobs. I was working on doing business. I was just practically moving with the rest of my life, and in some cases, it was also working with, okay, so if this is not working, the relationship with her was not going to be a thing. There were some other points where I considered, okay, well, if God changed his mind, or because God will say something, the end goal is certain, which is getting married, but sometimes, you know, the individual in question may vary. So take, for example, like in the case of Mary, the angel appeared to her and said, okay, was it blessed art thou? If Mary had said, nope, I don't want this, of course, God won't necessarily force her to say, no, you're the only virgin that must take this thing. God will find another virgin, that because she wasn't the only virgin, right? So, and the Savior will still be born according to prophecy through a virgin. Now, but of course, this one is it's slightly different, right? But I just believe that in my own estimation, the end goal is that I would be married to somebody who will help me fulfill destiny. But if the other individual doesn't work, God is never going to be stranded. He already has a way out. So I was thinking maybe I should meet other people. And if I feel the go ahead to actually go ahead with them, I would. And at some point, yeah, I did get engaged to somebody else. And yes, we almost got married. Yeah, so that happened. I was just doing the next best thing and moving on with the rest of my life and making sure that that wasn't hampering anything else. as far as I was concerned. So, did I ever consider marrying somebody else if it didn't work out with my wife? Yes, I did, because I was actually engaged to somebody else at some point. Now, before all of this happened, there had been different suggestions. Family suggested somebody, brothers, sister. Everybody was trying to. Oh, Steve needs someone. And everybody knew this other lady. Everybody knew the story, and we're like, well, I mean, if she doesn't want it, she doesn't want it. And so if you're gonna meet someone else, yeah, maybe it will help out. So everybody was doing the best. I was meeting people. They were, referring different people. I had friends who did the same, and that's a different conversation entirely, because I think I'll write a book about it. So I was engaged to someone who I met her at a conference I was a speaker at. It was a seminar for the US Embassy in Lagos, Nigeria. And yeah, we just sort of clicked and we started talking. And after a few weeks or maybe a couple of months, yeah, when I saw that we were gelling, you know, too well, I went back to prayer. I was like, okay, God, so the person you originally spoke about is not clicking. So, and this one seems to be on point. What do you think? And at the time, I remember I didn't hear anything. The only thing was I felt peace in my heart to go ahead in a relationship with her. But I just kept thinking, oh, do I want to do this? But I didn't have any holdback in my spirit. So I took it as a go ahead and I went on. But when I prayed about it, God didn't say to marry her. But I didn't feel a holdback in getting into a relationship with her. No. I say that just because of some other things that happened later. So anyway, I spoke with her. I was like, oh, well, and I was pretty open with her. I said, well, I haven't heard anything from God about you. I feel peace in my heart to go ahead with you, but I want you to go pray. Come back to me and let me know what God says to you. But I also did let her know that I had heard something about someone else in the past that wasn't working. But if she went on ahead to pray and said, God told her yes, I'm going to start the relationship with her, and the only person who will break it would be her. Now, thinking back, that was risky, but so that was what happened, and we started a relationship. So for context, this lady that I was engaged to, we had been together for about 3 years. We had planned to move to Canada together. We already settled everything, so it was just a matter of get married. It wasn't going to make sense for both of us to move to Canada together and then we have to go rent different houses. It was like, we get married and I mean move on with our lives. And there was a crunch time, there was a point where we needed to get out. At least for me, there was a point that I needed to move, and a point where it would make sense for her also to move. Otherwise, things might go wrong with being able to get in. So that was it. So already got the plane tickets, already had the visas and the permits. So it was just really unreasonable for us to just keep waiting, for people's sentiments. But of course, in this case, it was her dad. So I do understand the gravity of it. I'm not dismissing that it was important, but that was one of the reasons where we thought, okay, we've spoken with the dad's pastor, we'd spoken with the mom, with everybody else seems to be on the same page except the dad. And it was quite a struggle, there was a struggle there also. So eventually we just thought, well, I think we have done everything naturally possible to help the father see why we needed to go ahead, but it just didn't work out. So we had gone to the courthouse to do some oath taking to ratify the fact that we've not been married to anybody else, and so the wedding was going to happen on Saturday. And as we got in an Uber ride, we were just going back home. I was going to drop her off at her place. The Holy Spirit spoke to me to say, Steve, what if you disagreed with who your daughter wanted to get married to? I was like, well, I'm a logical man. I'm going to be reasonable and blah, blah, blah. And I said, yeah, true, but you and your daughter disagree on who she's about to marry. What would you want happen? Would you want her to go ahead and marry the guy regardless? And I was like, definitely not. And the Holy Spirit said, don't set a precedence. And so with that, I took it as an instruction. This was me just beside, the lady, and we were talking, we were gisting, but I was having that conversation with God in my mind. And so I just went on ahead to tell her that, okay, you know what? Although we've spent some money and gone through some of this process, but on Saturday, let's not do the wedding. But let us travel, let us travel, like take a vacation, for example. Let us travel somewhere and then talk to your parents from there. Now, for context, at this point, we had already been talking about getting married. We started talking about relocation. In fact, we had everything about relocation to Canada settled. So it was just a matter of we got married, moved to Canada, start living, and continued our life together. So that was, but, and at that point, I needed to get out of Nigeria at some point. I had done that because I was in Canada for 6 months to get a job, get a place, and all of that. So it was just for her to, come into Canada and then do her settling. So there was some timing thing, like it makes sense for us to get married and move. Anyway, the Holy Spirit had told me to call that off, so I did that. But let us go to Canada and see how we can talk to them from there. Meanwhile, the conversation was that she'll take a break, maybe like a week or two, and then talk to her parents from Canada and to say, okay, this is what's going on. But on the Saturday that we had agreed that we would travel together, she came, and then after some conversation, she just ended the relationship. And that was it. So on that Saturday that she came to my place, actually we were supposed to get married that Saturday, leave later that night for Canada. But she came in earlier, broke up the relationship, and I was the only one who left for Canada that day. And ever since then, I think it was another 4.5 to 5 years of just trying to meet other people and talking to people who were referred to me. And yeah, but none ever really worked. Well, until my wife came along. So how did I feel when my ex broke up with me at the time? I mean, after this huge plan of, well, we're going to get married, that same night we head out to Canada. It sounds a little bit like a fairy tale, but I remember when we were having the conversation that particular Saturday, and the conversation it was almost becoming heated. I was like, what is going on here? And then I just went on ahead to ask, okay, so do you still want to be in this relationship? And then in a quick second, she looked down and said, no. And at that moment, it was as though I felt a rush of peace through my heart. Almost like I just scored a goal. Like, yes. I mean, it was a bad situation, but that was what was going on in my heart. And it was so much peace, it was so much joy that I almost burst into laughter. But of course, within a few seconds, the reality of the situation was, oh, Steve, you're going back to Canada. There's no wife in Canada. So, but she was just across the table. So within a split second before she looked up to look at my reaction, rather than the happy face, thank God, I don't even know how to describe that. I can't really describe it, but there was so much peace in my heart. So, and usually, that had always been a way that God guided me, the way he guides me. So if I feel peace about a particular situation or peace about a particular thing, I take it as a go ahead, which was almost like what I felt going into a relationship with her. But every time we talked about the wedding, so while we were planning the wedding and all the courthouse, my spirit was like, but I kept thinking, oh, maybe it's me developing cold feet. But I mean, in retrospect, I know for sure, or now that it was God just giving me a pointer to say, you're not supposed to be making this move. So at different points, I just kept checking. Yes, I was spending the money, buying the tickets, and doing the everything, but I just kept checking. So the moment she broke off the relationship, and I felt that rush of peace, I was like, this is what God has been showing me. I mean, has been guiding me through in my heart. And so it didn't feel so sore because I actually really did love her, but it is what it is. Move on, So I got on the plane later that night, went back to Canada, single, searching, stressed. So that was what happened at the time. Otherwise, that was the last time that I actually was very close to getting married to anyone, because every other person that I was meeting was it just didn't work. There was somebody else that was a very strong consideration for me, because we kind of have about the same kind of background and all, but by the time we were getting to a point where I should make a decision, I went back, prayed about it, and then God showed me a vision about this person, and which was like, no, no. I didn't know her well enough. This particular lady, I mean, she was in another part of Canada, so it was a lot easier. But in the vision God showed me, it was a no-no. And I just stopped talking. I mean, we were still talking as friends, but that was the end of any possibility or prospecting along her line, and that was it. So I just kept following my spirit. If my spirit said no, I didn't bother. So yeah, that was what happened. Okay, so did I consider going back with my ex? Because I mean, I did mention earlier that I loved her, and I think she's a great girl actually. Now, of course, there were conversations along that line, because I mean, we still talked. We talked after then. There were many things that she helped me with, and that I also helped her with. But the only question was, in while I knew that I loved her and she's a great person, I couldn't shake off the feeling I had the moment she broke off with me. And so, for every single time that conversation came up between us, I was like, yeah, it's it's a possibility. I liked the idea because I didn't have any problems with her, but I would have to check that peace value. You know, I'll have to revisit that. If I still don't have that peace, then it's not going to happen. And of course, she at the point she was still single, and single probably we would still have made a very good match, but it wouldn't have been God's match. And that part was really important to me. So yes, we did talk about it. And I know that a lot of times people talk about, oh, they've missed their ex and all of that. Like, yeah, but that's because they don't have a why. They should leave the ex. In my own case, it was a peace, God's leading value. That was my why. So as much as I can interact with her now, I can talk with her, have conversations without any bad blood. The why is stronger than whatever feelings that I had. And so that was it for me. So another question is, over the years, I mean, 24 years is quite long. Wasn't God saying anything else? As far as wife was concerned, God wasn't saying anything. God was mute, super mute, dead silent. And it was frustrating because sometimes I interpreted it as, oh, maybe I'm not hearing God again because God was angry with me, And so I was giving my life to Christ every church service because I thought maybe it's something I did wrong. And of course, exposure in some messages that you heard here and there. So I kept giving my life to Christ. I kept, trying, and it was frustrating. But every single time I wanted to move ahead, to say, oh, maybe let me just go with the flow, then that peace factor will come. Oh, there was one particular one where I was going to ask a particular lady out. Great lady, you know. I set up the mood. We're at an eatery, you know, and things were looking good. As I was about to ask her out, I lost my peace. I stopped. That happened about 3 times. The fourth time, each time I kept losing my peace at the point I was going to ask her out. By the fourth time, I was like, God, the person you spoke to me about, you won't talk to her. I am growing old, I don't care. I'm asking this lady out today. And that's why I said, I was angry, but I was talking to God, right? Like, today I'm asking this particular lady out, and I don't care what you say because you've done nothing about the lady that you've told me would be my wife. And I remember, set up the mood. It was a nice, outing. And then as I opened my mouth to, go with the lines that I had rehearsed, I just heard at the back of my mind, the same way I heard the very first time that, oh, this is your wife, as clear as that was, I heard in my mind that you're going to suffer. Now, I say it in English because it's going to be a diverse audience, but I heard it in my local dialect, Iyama J. And when you hear God speaking in your local dialect, you know that there's trouble. It's happened to me a few times, so I know. And that was it. So I froze in that moment. I couldn't tell her what was on my mind. She knew what I was going to say, but I just found a way to cover it up. We ended that evening, and so for me, it was consistently hearing God. So God wasn't saying anything, it was frustrating, but I still kept looking for that peace value at every point to say, this must be God's leading. So while he was quiet, all I was just doing was following the last instructions. And that's what I do about everything in my life, whether it's a job or business or an idea or something that I'm trying to do. I just follow the last instruction because sometimes the fact that God is silent doesn't mean that you've done something wrong. It just means that he hasn't changed his mind. So stick with what he has said. He's not like an earthly father that would say, oh, I'll buy you a bicycle and then tomorrow he changes his mind. No, he tells you what he will do and sticks with it. That's why the Bible says he's holy. He doesn't change. That is his character. All right. So another question that has always been is about pressure. How did I handle pressure, external pressure, family pressure, and the rest of it? Now, to give a bit of context, if you're growing up in an African home, or let me just say Nigerian, there's a lot of pressure, especially when you get to a certain age and you're not married yet. There's going to be that question every single time. When are you going to get married? Of course, that happened a lot, and for good reason, because everybody's concerned. And I was growing older, and there was nobody that they knew, to be within my radar. Because to some extent, even for me, I was very quiet. I was very quiet about everything that I was doing. So anyone that was a prospect, I didn't let anybody know except it was confirmed to say this is a relationship, because you also don't want to appear like you pick up this girl, you drop that girl, you pick up that girl, and then it looks entirely messy. So While I had prospects, I didn't let anybody know except it was confirmed. And the only person that anybody knew was my ex because we were in a relationship. So, how did I handle family pressure? I think for me, one of the major things that I tried to do early was I needed to make sure that I was convinced about what I was doing at every point. So even if I was like on a wrong path, in quotes, I had to be convinced that what I thought I was doing, what I thought was right. So, and if there was any superior argument or superior, what's it called, influence, then I make sure that I'm flexible enough to work with that new influence. But in many cases, I was pretty much settled. I was settled about the fact that I knew God spoke to me about someone. I was settled about the fact that God confirmed everything that I had heard. So it was unshakable the way that I felt about that particular person. But of course, I couldn't be too sure because I was in Nigeria. She was, at that point, my wife was growing up in the UK at some point. So I didn't know what her day to day was. Was she in a relationship? Was she even married? I didn't know. I mean, I could have an idea because I was still kind of close with the family, the cousins, and everybody just loved Steve. Who wouldn't? But but I really didn't know what was going on with her. So I was certain that until I heard that she was getting married, then it was still a possibility. Or I was going to wait for her to get married and then maybe God will give me a new instruction. So I was resolute, you know, in my mind. So all the pressures that was coming from outside. It wasn't coming from within. And so if anything was going to shake me, one of the things I would do was I would go ahead and pray about it. Okay, God, I mean, they're not just concerned. Even I am concerned for myself. I mean, I waited for so long to see myself get married. You know, sometimes I look in the mirror like, Steve, when are you going to get married? Yeah, I think I was getting insane at the point. But, whatever the case was, the pressure wasn't from within, it was mostly without. I mean, there were other things that were social and societal pressures. There were younger men that I was mentoring that were getting married, or younger friends that were getting married. And in many cases, I was the one advising them on, how to go about the relationship. In some cases, how to even plan their weddings. And there were even cases where, you know, these people did not, we were close friends, but they didn't tell me they were getting married because, you know, maybe I wouldn't jinx it with whatever was going on with me. So there were crazy other things that happened, but I was very resolute about what potentially the kind of position not being married would put me in. And I just stayed with, okay, God, I know you spoke to me about this. Until you tell me something else, maybe not. And that's how I settled that. So now, what happened about, the moment, how did everything now get here? Of course, we did a whole video about, what was happening on her side, what was happening on my side, when we reconnected. But generally, I think after all of that trouble of, pressures and stuff like that, there were a series of things that happened before we got married. We got reconnected again somehow, supernaturally. Some bittersweet story on that one. Like I said, we have a whole video telling the story about how God was dealing with her on her side, how God was dealing with me on my side, and how everything played out that we got married. But essentially, what had happened was over the years, I had remained a friend of hers. So my wife and I never entirely stopped talking, like, oh, your friend zone, get out. That that wasn't the way it happened. So we stayed being friends. Don't forget, I'm the one who got a conviction that God spoke to me about her. So just because she wasn't on the same page didn't mean, I'll just delete her from my friend list or something. So I kept talking with her. I have a very good relationship with her family and extended family. So generally, I mean, I wasn't in their face, but I kept in touch as much as I could, so that it also doesn't look too creepy. So, so that was necessary because I also believe that if God has spoken about someone to me, the least I could do is what would God expect me to do? At least talk to the person or keep some kind of contact with the person. And so I was just doing my own part on that level. Now, if it so much happened that maybe she got married to somebody else, yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be that. I mean, I would still have done what I needed to do and give God the way, the channel through which He could make His words fulfilled upon my life. And so that was all that was happening. We got reconnected again, and because we never were really out of touch, everything connected, at an instant. And by the time she got her own conviction, to plug in to the entire system, it was quite easy. It was quite easy. And then we picked a wedding date. Both sides of the family were already familiar with each other, and everything just went easy from there. So what happened? I think at the end of the day, 2023, I remember starting that year, January, and I remember praying about the year and everything, and I remember God speaking to me to say, to remember His promise. And at the point, the only thing, that was pending was this marriage matter. And so I remember God giving me the instruction to get something, just as the stars were for Abraham. I needed to have something that would remind me of what He had spoken. So I remember at the time, the only thing I could think about was get like a credit card in her name as an additional card holder under my account. So I got it in her name, my wife's name, as Apampa hyphen Araba, you know, and that was the way it was. And I at some point I just kept the credit card in my wallet. Every time I needed to purchase something, sometimes I used the card, sometimes I just saw it and I was like, God, just God, all those silent prayers you don't have words for. And a few things happened within my family, and somehow we got reconnected together through a relative of mine who happened to be a family friend of hers. We both didn't know that. She didn't know it was a relative of mine. I didn't know it was a family friend of theirs. And then, she came into the picture and then asked me questions about, oh, what happened between the two of you. Anyway, we got reconnected. We started talking again and started talking like we really used to. And the truth was, nothing really had changed. We were still really good friends, just not on the relationship thing. And I think maybe a couple of months down the line, you know, things just flipped for her at some point. I hope you'll be able to check the video out. We told a very detailed story about how we reconnected and how God made everything so beautiful. At some point, things flipped for her, and she got her conviction from God that I am her husband. And she worked through the process herself. I think spoke with her pastor, spoke with different other trusted spiritually intelligent people in her life, and that was it. So because all along we had been friends, it was easy for us to reconnect. There wasn't so many gaps in what I knew about her or what she knew about me. And then both sides of the family had kind of been friends or at least familiar. So after we started out on a relationship, within I think it was 2 months after, we just said, okay, well, we want to get married. Spoke with both sides of the family, and everybody was like, yeah, it's been a long time coming. So I think it was 4 to 6 months after we decided that we were now together as a couple, that we got married. So went to Nigeria, had a big wedding. It was beautiful, and it was very peaceful too because it was so well organized. I was just a guest at the place, and there was no stress. Also for her, we had really people coming to do a lot of beautiful work for us, and it's been beautiful ever since. Okay, we did an extensive video about, how did it flip for her, what was she thinking, what was going through her mind, what was happening with me, and things like that. So please check it out, and I'm sure you're going to be blessed by it. There are questions about what did I learn through the entire process. There are a number of them. One of it is that God is God, and if He has spoken something, He will do it. He's not someone who will change His mind, and you just need to trust that. And in trusting that, they will have to come to a point where you die to your own personal thinking, what you think should be the timeline, what you think should be the best approach, what you think should be the best channel. You practically have to die, because when you look at someone like Abraham, for example, the position of faith is death to self, complete obedience. You don't have an idea, you don't have an opinion. It's just what God has said, and you just have to follow through with that. So that happened. Two, don't ever speak words to bind yourself to anyone at any point in time. So your own challenge may not necessarily be that you're waiting on God to get married to someone, but when you're getting into a relationship with someone, until you are absolutely sure that that is the person God wants you to marry, don't use words to bind yourself. In my own case, I did. God helped me, because I told the lady, my ex, that she was the only one who could break up that relationship. For as long as she was with me, I would get married to her. But thankfully, she broke it off, and that set me free. Because I believe that it's not until you say I do that you're actually making a covenant. The words that you speak, they're covenants by themselves. So that's one. Then in a case where you're not hearing God, you're not hearing anything new, the best thing to do is just follow the last instruction. It's basically like in an army. When your commander gives a command, you keep obeying that command until he changes the command. And the Bible says that we're soldiers. So if he gives you a command, he's not going to come and see how you feel about it from time to time. He's just going to stay with that instruction. And that was one. Another thing is, while you're waiting on the promise, just do the next best thing in line of that promise, in line with that promise. So take, for example, while my wife was not talking with me, or, I was in that perfect friend zone, I could have gotten frustrated and just, left everything. And actually, I would still be okay as a human being, but would that have been the best that God wanted for me? Probably not. So what did I do in the line of what I was believing God for? I kept, speaking with her as friends, Of course, that would be painful, and I know not many people would be able to do that. But if it's God that spoke to you about it, what's the next best thing you could do in the line of the promise? If God says you're going to be a president, then what do presidents do? They probably get an education, then go to school, even though you are not president yet. It's a long process. You probably need to join a political party. So just do the next best thing in the area in line with what God has told you, and keep working with it until the sun shines on that area. And then another thing that I learned along the line is God's goal is never the destination. It is the journey. It is the process. So through the years, I could see how God was working on my character, how God was building me to be the husband I needed to be for her. And like I said earlier, what's the next best thing you could do? I was thinking, well, when I get married, at some point my wife is probably going to be pregnant, so she won't be able to cook. I should learn how to cook. So I learned how to cook, I learned how to clean, I learned how to at least set up a house to some keep it clean and on the barest minimum, you know. And those were the things that I was learning. There were other things in the area of character, shedding things off that, would potentially impact on her as a person, or things that you shouldn't be as a husband, or you shouldn't be doing as a man. So, and then there were other areas of focusing on areas of God's calling upon my life, learning to be a teacher, learning to be a mentor, learning to be a discipler. Those were things that I was working on. And so God was working on those things in my life without the hindrance, or without the extra commitment of, oh, I'm in a relationship, there's a girl that I have to see. So all of those things were happening with me. Character development, dealing with rejection, dealing with bitterness, resentment when people treat you without respect just because you're not married, how to cope with those and still be the best that you can be. How do you handle finances? There were just different things that God was taking me through, and I was aware about them. So while you're waiting, pay attention to those lessons. So there's another question where people are asking, so if it was a woman, what should they do in that situation? I honestly do not know how women feel, and I cannot underestimate the pressure that they go through. It's probably more than that of guys, because there are many factors, that come into play. But I would say that if God has actually spoken to you about a guy and the guy is oblivious of it, a possibility is let him know. Let him know that you're interested. You know, I would shy away from telling a guy that, or telling anybody straight up that, oh, God told me this about you. And so you don't want to bamboozle them into that. So let them know you're interested. Just make sure you're friends first. Make sure you're friends first, so there's a platform on which you can say, oh, well, I'm actually interested, as if the guy is not, coming through on that level. So, and stay being friends, but I would say don't peg your life, because sometimes another thing that happens is the lady stays so much around this particular guy who is interested in somebody else, but everyone who sees the lady attaches her to that particular guy. Because like I said, in sharing my own experience, the end goal is getting married. Sometimes the channel may change, because if, for example, God had told you that it was the guy, and the guy dabbles into other things that would not make that destiny God mapped him for to be fulfilled on your life, then he's probably going to change the person, But just keep listening. Keep listening as long as you feel peace in your heart, and just continue with that. Spend time praying. Pray about it a lot. And in some cases, praying is not, just praying in tongues, and, pray in English. God, this is how I feel. Brother A is not feeling me, and, I'm not feeling, I'm not liking the situation. Speak in English, in actual words, the actual emotions. There were times that I was so angry, I was words that I can never say outside. I was just using it to say, God, this is how I feel, and then I step out of my room with a bright smile. Some people would think when you express how you feel, how depressed or how angry or anything, when you express it to God, some people say, oh, you're disrespecting God. God is God, but at the same time, He's still your Father. And He dwells on the inside of you, by His Spirit. So it's a thing that you need to cultivate, that habit of talking with God. Because even in therapy, they tell you have to speak with someone, use words, and that will help you. another thing is just make sure you continue with your life. What are the things that you need to do to become that woman that would be the wife? Because another thing is you want to be the favor that that man will find. So whatever you need to learn, whatever you need to unlearn, those are the things you need to be working on, such that even if it doesn't work out with that particular guy anymore, whoever finds you is going to be a blessing. There was a particular point in my life, I was just like, you know what? Anybody who marries me is hitting a jackpot. I mean, I'm not a billionaire yet, but and that's not even what I'm talking about. I'm just saying I could see, the progress that God was making with me in character, in life, in spiritual development, and where He was taking me. I was like, whoever marries me is blessed. So you want to be in that position where you know that you're a blessing to whoever marries you. And God is going to honor that, definitely. Just keep working with Him, and He'll fulfill His own word, because at the end of the day, God fulfills His own word independent of you. So just keep working with Him. So during the times I was waiting, there were some funny things that were happening. I was listening to messages of different people that I actually do respect online. And sometimes YouTube just does this algorithm. Everybody's talking about the same thing. And what they were all talking about at that time, in fact, this was 2 years ago. They just kept saying, oh, move on. If God has told you something and it's been 3 years, 5 years, the person is not, aligning with you, move on. There's no unified destiny. They said a lot of things. Now, I feel like they are right. However, when it comes to truth, sometimes ministers make the mistake of speaking a truth as an absolute. In my own case, what they were saying was true, but it was not true for me, because at the end of the day, they are there to help you understand the workings of God, and how things would work together. But they were all saying, move on. And sometimes when you hear it first time, you hear it second time, you hear it third time, it would seem as though, oh, God was speaking to me. But no, God speaks to you first. Anything anybody else says is supposed to be a confirmation. Now, in my own case, God never changed what He spoke to me. And so any word coming from the outside needed to either support what I'd heard or not. And I was already too convinced to know that God spoke to me than for any external sources to be saying move on. And I could have moved on, and I would probably have married someone, and that person would have been blessed. But would I have been walking in the path of the destiny God made for me? Probably not, because He said one thing and He never changed what He said. And so you need to be careful. Those who read a lot in social media, they say, oh, this and that. Please, you need to be careful about that. Because at the end of the day, God won't judge you based on what you read from social media or what you heard from any other minister. God will judge you based on what He told you. And that is relevant in the Old Testament. There was this young prophet who God had given an instruction, just go prophesy to that city. Don't eat anything from there, But on his way back, he met this older prophet, also a prophet of God, and he came to give him another word to say, oh, God says you can eat with me now. God didn't change. God didn't speak to him again to say, oh, there's a confirmation, because God gave him that word and didn't change. Now, he went in to eat, and the story goes, when he was traveling back on his donkey out of that city, a lion came out of the bush, killed him, ate him up, and left the donkey. I mean, what are the odds? Because he violated what God spoke to him personally. And there's something my pastor in Ibadan, Nigeria, used to say. He used to say, you know, that it's the same Holy Spirit we all have. Everybody functions in different levels. Now, people are anointed on different level, grace on different level, but the Holy Spirit talks to you. So whatever he's saying to you, your pastor should be confirming, except you don't know how to hear God. Then that might be the time when you have to hear from your pastor first. But the Spirit of God bears witness within all of us. So learn to build that first and keep listening to that. Because at the end of the day, you can't say, oh, well, but my pastor said. What did I tell you? Is what God will ask you. So I think that'll be good. All right. I hope I've been able to answer a lot of the questions that you might have on your mind. Thank you very much for the questions. If you do have any other question, please keep them coming in. I'll do my best, or we will do our best to answer all those questions. And like I said, my wife made me do this. So please like, subscribe, and click on notification just in case we have something else coming up. I want my wife to smile about this, so please subscribe.